Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 22nd of January 2024. Let's get straight to the map. If you don't know what the lines mean on my map, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. So the northeastern sectors where we'll go to first, so Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea axis. So there has been a lot of activity around here. Sinkivka under a lot of pressure still from the Russians as a pushing to the southwest towards Kupiansk from that Vilshana kind of area down through Sinkivka, but also pushing across and taking Krokmalna, this village yesterday. There was a bit of confusion with what Syriac Maps was thinking. They then jigged their map around, and JR has updated today's map. Thanks so much, JR Legend. Updated today's map with these gains from the Russians here as they are moving towards the west. And my chair is just now depressing, so I must stop the video because look, I'm going. Bye. Man, I can't tell you how often that happens. Right, okay. So the Russians have had some success in Krokmalna. Now, Rebar talks about this whole sector, saying in the Svatova, this is Rebar, the Russian source, very pro-Russian, very in line with the Russian MOD, 90% of the time. In the Svatova sector, Russian forces continue to build on their success. The assault units of the Russian armed forces extended the zone of control to the north, approaching Kotlyaivka and Kislivka. From the south, the advance to the west is not stopping either. There are encounter attacks in Berestova and Krokmalna. Ukrainian units are trying to dislodge the Russian troops. So that is the area we are talking about, just north of Stelmakivka. There's been a lot of activity historically towards that direction. Now we are seeing the Russians have some joy here in the Avdiivka direction and towards Berestova further to the south. So this village of Krokmalna, about 45 houses, I believe, not the biggest settlement, but still, you know, something that the Russians have taken. They will be enjoying the PR of that online. The Ukrainian response is, quote, it's a small village where 45 people, sorry, not 45 houses, 45 people, even smaller actually. So that's what, 10 houses, 12 houses, who knows? It's a small village where 45 people lived before the Russian invasion. Settlement is in ruins and was not possible for our defenders to stay and defend it. Staying there could be a threat to our lives. We ensured the safety of our troops and took up better positions to defend. And by the way, I think the enemy had a very happy night in Krokmalna, which ended their desire to go any further. In other words, the Ukrainians may well have hit Krokmalna very hard after they ceded the territory to the Russians, giving the Russians a welcome present. Vladimir Fitio, the spokesman for the Ukrainian ground forces in the area, said of the recent capture of Krokmalna. So that's the situation there. I'm going to go, this is like the most that I'm going to be reading from Institute for the Study of War. It's just a few interesting observations here. There's not too much in the whole of the ISW for the rest of the front line, but Russian forces reportedly advanced northwest of Svatova amid continued positional fighting along the Kupiansk-Svatova line on the 21st, but there's no confirmed changes to the front line. A prominent Kremlin-affiliated Mill blogger claimed that Russian forces advanced southwest of Krokmalna and approach the eastern outskirts of Berestova. So just to remind you, the Berestova is here. Claim is that the eastern outskirts, they're approaching that, which, you know, ostensibly they may well be. A Mill blogger claimed that Russian forces have recently captured a 4-kilometer wide section of the R07 highway from Krokmalna and an unspecified section of the R07 highway near Novosibirsk. So that is going to be this area there. No doubt, or in fact, this whole part of the highway on the way further to the north and on the way further to the south too. So they already control parts of that, if it is indeed that road. I can't see it's any other road. Right, back to the ISW. ISW has not observed confirmation of those claims, though. The Russian MOD claimed that the Russians captured Krokmalna. Ukrainian Ground Forces spokesperson Fitio acknowledged that the Ukrainian forces withdrew from the settlement, as we just heard. ISW observed geolocated imagery from the 20th, indicating that Russian forces captured the town, and Russian sources claim that imagery shows elements of the Russian 47th Guards Tank Division in the settlement. Russian and Ukrainian sources stated yesterday that positional fighting continued northeast of Kupiansk near Sinkivka and Lake Liman, east of Kupiansk near Petropavlivka, northwest of Svatova near Krokmalna and Stelmakivka, and west of Svatova near Kolomochi Mechika. In other words, for the rest of this area, we are seeing positional fighting take place. The Russians have really struggled to break through in and around Sinkivka, and that therefore remains fairly positional. And then just finally here, Fitio stated that the Russian forces have lost 7,055 personnel in the Kupiansk and Liman directions so far in January. So in the 22 days of January, in this area, the Russians have lost 7,055 troops, as according to the Ukrainian estimations, which is pretty staggering. If they were losing 1,000 a day in the whole of the Ukraine, the Russians, if they were losing that, then a third of them would be being lost up here. So if they're at 1,000 a day, they'd be losing 300 a day here. That's I think how that broadly equates 300 or so troops. But the Russian forces lost roughly 14,000 personnel in these directions in December 2023. So that's actually even more in December that they lost there, given that December's 31 days and we're already 22 days through this month. So it's been an area that the Russians have taken significant casualties, and when we see those very high figures on a daily basis, that a large part of those losses will be coming from that axis. Then as we come further down, Bilohorivka is pretty hot at the moment. The Russians have made some significant gains to the northeast of there over the last few days. As you can see, that's a May the 30th line from last year, and the Russians have taken all of that since then. I say all of that, that is in 7 months or so, almost 8 months. They've gone 2 kilometers, so you could argue whoop-de-doo. Going back to the Institute for the Study of War, nothing really to report about Bakhmut, as you can see there, and going down further. So we're actually going to go all the way to Avdiivka now. Bakhmut seeing pretty positional fighting, not a lot of activity, comparatively speaking, compared to what we have seen there and compared to what's going on in the rest of the front line, particularly in Avdiivka, or at least one area of Avdiivka. So no changes to the north, no changes to the south around Vodyane or Opitny, but the significant changes, Andrew Perpetua has that the Russians have taken Sarska Ohota, that restaurant area, as they punch through the forest area along the road. I've talked about how it's going to be difficult for the Russians to move through this forest area, and indeed they haven't really. They've said, right, fortification is too difficult, let's just overcome the Ukrainians along this road. And apparently the Ukrainians are struggling for supplies and ammunition, and so they conceded that territory to the Russians. Of course, that then puts the Russians in the southern datches of Avdiivka, and that is a real worry. Surrey Maps has them taking a large swathe of this territory, much more than is admitted by the other mappers, and we'll see if that is confirmed later or not. The ISW says Russian forces recently made confirmed advances south and southwest of Avdiivka. Geolocated footage on the 21st it shows that Russian forces advanced in the Sarska Ohota restaurant area along Soborna Street, so on and so forth. ISW has not seen confirmed evidence of that, though. So, be a little wary about that. I mean, we have seen, not all the time though recently, but we have seen many of the successes around Avdiivka that Surrey Maps has sort of heralded earlier than the other mappers have been broadly true, but some of the other claims around the front line have been quite overconfident by Surrey Maps, and we are often seeing, walking back, and indeed that may be the case, or it could well be a counterattack down in the south near Robotina. So, near Velika Novoselka, sorry. So, we must be careful not to just take on board exactly what Surrey Maps is saying for good reason. So, Stupin, spokesman, has stated that Russian forces are preparing to intensify activity in the Avdiivka direction and have concentrated over 40,000 personnel in the area. Tarnavsky noted that Russian forces have not conducted any airstrikes in that direction over the past 2 days. So that's significant. There are no airstrikes in arguably this whole area. Unfortunately, I don't like that term, the Tavrisk area because it entails all of this front line. But to have no aerial strikes in that area for 2 days, I think is significant. So what does that mean? Is that a case of Ukrainian air defenses, or is it a case of not having enough munitions to do those airstrikes or enough airplanes? Which one? Because again, they would. They aren't, so they can't. And honestly, I live by that mantra. There's no point not doing something if it's really useful that you do it and you can do it. In military terms, you're wasting opportunities there. So that would they're either being incredibly stupid, or they don't need to drop bombs. Well, then the next time they drop bombs, what's the difference? Or they can't drop those bombs because of material issues. So I think that's something fairly significant there. Now, if we go to some of the other sources concerning Avdiivka, I think, did I finish that? Yeah, no strikes there. So we go to no reports. He says the northern part of Avdiivka remains unchanged. Fighting continues in and around Stepova. South of Avdiivka, the Russians have managed to slightly increase their positions near the M03 highway into the private sector. Fighting is ongoing, situation highly fluid. So not nearly as, positive for the Russians as Suryat maps that shows a much larger sort of push into that private sector, as no reports calls it. But as in, I think Suryat maps would have the Russians all the way up here. Not the case for no reports. Who knows what the actual truth is? As Suryat map says, the Russian army advanced in Sportivna and Chernyshevskogo streets. The last positions taken by the Russian troops are located in a high area that allows control by fire of the Ukrainian positions in the southeastern forest belts. The consolidation of those positions by the Russian troops would put the Ukrainian army deployed in the Summer Cottage and the former Air Defense Missile Battalion in a semi-enclosed situation. That would force a withdrawal on the area coloured in yellow, allowing the Russian army to be in a suitable position for an assault on the Kharkiv direction. So, in other words, if the Russians continue their success in this area and are able to consolidate these positions, they will have fire control over this whole area, and that pocket there would be very vulnerable for the Ukrainians, and they'd have to pull back. Now, is it Zenit? Is this Zenit that has been held? It's like a nuclear bunker area that the Ukrainians have not been pushed out of, and there's been very little chance of the Russians being able to do that. Now, this situation could spell the end for Ukrainians holding on to here. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Ukrainians try and do now. Whether this will be an accepted advance by the Russians, whether this is all part of what will eventually become just an operational withdrawal from Avdiivka, or do they push back and fight for every square meter of Avdiivka? We shall see. But the Ukrainians under a lot of pressure, certainly in the southeast of Avdiivka at the moment. Going back to the ISW then, as you can see, not a lot else to report from elsewhere. We are going to pop into, we're going to bypass Mariinka, Novomykhailivka, pass Vuhledar, and come on to Velika Novosilka area, where both mappers, Andrew Perpetua and Suryat maps have stated that the Ukrainians have made gains back in this Uruzhaini area. Suryat maps had some gains for the Russians, and then the next day had gains for the Ukrainians as the Ukrainians pushed the Russians back and back to where they started. What it looks like the Ukrainians are continuing to push the Russians back here. Interestingly, not mentioned at all in the Institute for the Study of War, just goes on to talk about Robotina, no Velika Novosilka section at all there. So interesting, these two mappers are clocking some activity there and some gains for the Ukrainians. Good news, I'm sure they'll take that. Then as we come past Robotina, nothing to report there in terms of changes to the front line from the ISW. It just says no confirmed changes to the front there, and no other sources, although this has just come out today, 12:17, so that's 2 hours ago or so. South of the village of Robotina, south of the village have been Ukrainian forces have made some advances in part of the forest. To the northwest of the village, it was possible to regain previously lost positions. So the Ukrainians, according to Getty here, and I've not seen this in any other sources yet, claiming that the Ukrainians are having success both towards Kopani, up in this northern part of the salient, and down to the south towards Novoprokopivka. So that could be something to watch out for. Are the Russians a little bit vulnerable? Have they moved troops elsewhere? Are they just not? Were they not on guard there? You know, what's going on? How are the Ukrainians able to make some gains there when they should be on the back foot? And then Krynky, no changes there. It's one of these places that I just think must be absolutely brutal for both sides. The ISW doesn't really report anything. No changes to Frontline there. There are some videos coming out. So here's one, as I referenced earlier today in my news video. Russian occupiers asked Shoigu to take them away from Krynky. So we just quickly whiz through this. So they say, who they are. Attached servicemen like myself, private telegraph of the separate comms platoon, at the same time drone operators saying who they are, what they do. We're asking Shoigu to look into the ongoing lack of order, they say, towards us in Krynky. We've been here since the 2nd of August 2023. Today is the 20th of January 2024. In these 7 months, we haven't had one day off, not one rotation. Since the 2nd of August, we're under constant shelling from all calibers, including cluster munitions and phosphorus bombs. Interesting. So claiming that Ukraine is using phosphorus munitions there. In the sky, there are heaps of drones, reconnaissance, loitering, and kamikaze. On the 14th of October, when the Ukrainians break through to our shore, shelling and drone strikes multiplied. Many of our brothers in arms left Krynky as wounded, and those unlucky as dead. Many wounded died due to long evacuation. We're not abandoning positions, but morale and exhaustion grows daily. However, our command is not carrying out rotation, not letting us to deserved leaves or undeserved leaves, not providing winter uniforms. Many spend their own money. Food and gas are bought in tiny quantities. Due to this, we have to walk to a shop 7 kilometers from our location. A road to the shop is fired on by the Ukrainians, they say. Some of us die on our way back from the shop. We are not provided bottled water. And he continues, in winter, we have a simple issue with bathing. Many questions about payments. No one was paid combat money for December. Daily pay for active combat is not paid either. Many of us are paid regular salary while being in Krynky. We're asking Shoigu to look into the ongoing lack of order and injustice on our section of the front line. Attention to the blatant violation of rights of servicemen. So just a really interesting variety of issues that these guys have in terms of conditions, payments, rotation, evacuation of wounded, constant hammering by the Russian artillery and one would presume mortars and drones. Just, it sounds very bad for the Russians, at least for these guys in that area there. But as I always say, it's not going to be easy for the Ukrainians. It's shooting fish in a barrel. You know where the Ukrainians are. They're in a very confined space, and the Russians are just going to be absolutely hammering that with all they have. So I think it's a pretty thankless task to be the people that are being used to attract and fix the Russians in the area so that they get hammered, and then the Russians have to release videos like this to complain, whereas it's the mainstream media that go to speak to the Ukrainian servicemen who are, if they are lucky enough to get away from there and get shipped back to the other side, then they're picked up by the New York Times or whoever, and then say, oh, woe is us, woe is us. It's not that they're not telling the truth, but it's about the contextual understanding of what's going on and the balancing by knowing what's happening for the Russians. Yes, it's tough for you, and yes, it's horrible, but is it more horrible for the Russians? Are the Russians losing more equipment and personnel than you to the tune that is advantageous for the Ukrainians, such that they stay in that bridgehead? And that, as far as I'm concerned, must be what is taking place. But if you are one of those Ukrainian troops, you're not going to like that, and so you will be moaning to the New York Times if they they come and speak to you. Anyway, that's my tuppence. There's nothing I hadn't said before on that last point. But yeah, that's the Frontline for you. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. Thank you for all those who have supported. I just have to take my son ice skating. I was going to do a big thank you, a formal thank you, and say some names of people who have helped on Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. I'll do that in the next video. Take care, everybody. Speak soon.